Hi, good morning. Hot take time. Louise Flannery is the best Jew in the show, hands down. In this video, I'm going to overview every major love interest to build my case for Bronte being the absolute peak you and the best writing that could have ever ended the show. While each of Joe's obsessions challenge his delusional self-mythology, Louise is the only one to consciously mirror Joe's narrative construction in search of meaning and purpose, and ultimately choose to relinquish the power. So, spoilers for everything. Sleepwalking through life as a hollow nobody with no identity of his own, Joe Goldberg sought out someone, to bring excitement and meaning to his life and came across cool rocker chick Candace Stone. Candace was an ambitious young woman and aspiring musician, owning her voice to perform for crowds and showcasing her music career on Instagram. She had big dreams that couldn't fit in Joe's tiny apartment, and when Candace said, "I'm not gonna write you a love song, what are you gonna do about it?" Joe buried her in the woods and hijacked her Instagram to perform their relationship without her. He learned that even if he killed someone, as long as he controlled the narrative, he could avoid any consequences and moved on to his next victim, revising his tactics to whittle away at the character of writer Guinevere Beck. Beck was an average young woman, albeit a little more aimless than the last, and still figuring out her voice as a writer. She wasn't a performer, but shared minor moments of her life on social media like it was second nature. Joe started to look in on her life and took control of her story, deciding to himself who Beck would be instead of letting her figure that out for herself. She fell for his deception, unaware that he was overwriting her and weaponizing affection. She learns in the cage to perform and play along, but prematurely drops the act before she can fully escape Joe's grasp. When Beck rejects Joe, he kills her because he hinged his whole identity on her perception of him, so if she doesn't see him how he wants, then he decides she won't see anything ever again. Joe appropriates Beck's book to rewrite the reality of their tragic love story, believing that once his narrative is published, it can't be taken from him. He waits a few months until a new woman walks into the bookstore because he is still chillin' in New York, and it's inconveniently Candace come back to life to confront Joe after learning of Guinevere Beck. She claims that she's going to make Joe face himself, so he runs away to LA where he finds Love Quinn, who kinda turns out to be the female version of him. Considering Candace's claim that pursuing love would lead to the same dead end, Joe convinces himself that he can subvert the story by letting Love direct their relationship, at least appearing to submit to her vision, while secretly setting the scene so Love internalizes that each impulsive choice is hers alone. Love believes she made the first move, unaware that Joe had been stalking her, and she performed for Joe to define herself. With her social media set to private, Love crafted her character through what she allowed Joe to perceive. But Joe and Love were competing for narrative control, and while Joe was trying to run from his abusive self, Love was trying to yes and embrace it. She offered him the acceptance he craved, but revealed her own violence to Joe and broke the illusion of innocence he had been projecting onto her. Joe nearly kills Love in the cage in season 2, and despite showing her who he really is, and how disposable she is to him, Love commits to her happily ever after with Joe when he spares her after revealing that she's pregnant. Love spends the third season trying to play her part, but Joe fixates on his neighbor Natalie, who turns out to be too forward in her pursuit of an illicit affair and turns Joe off. But Love kills her anyway, and Joe moves on to local librarian Marian Bellamy. Marian was a normal woman and working mom. She didn't seek out Joe, she didn't perform for him or share her life with the world. She became a character in his story after he came to volunteer at the library, and she got to know him as just your average Joe. Marian was narratively convenient for Joe, and while he did fantasize about her, Joe was just using Marian to cast himself as her savior to play out his violent fantasies. But his characterization depends on her validation, and when she learns that Joe murdered her ex, Marian rejects him, so he locks her away to silence her disapproval as it's no longer convenient. It's crazy shit, but Marian Bellamy has been through it, and she subverts Joe's ending for her, surviving without his knowledge by playing into his own self-mythology to perform the scene that he needs to let her go. Joe learns just about nothing from Marian and starts looking in on the life of Kate. Lockwood? Galvin? Catherine? Kate Lockwood grew up controlled by her stalker father and cast by him into playing the part of the prodigy. She performed for Tom's approval until she woke up to reality and realized she couldn't remain complicit in his business. Kate ran away to London to redefine herself, and Joe can't help but want to co-opt that narrative. She falls for Joe's noble night guy act in London because this fool is duping even himself, but when the cracks in his mask start to show back home, Kate slowly reconsiders everything she believed about Joe. Initiating a divorce doesn't make Kate doubt herself because she's been living authentically and intentionally, being honest about what she wants, leading the company in a new direction, and choosing to become Henry's loving mother. Unlike Love, who became a mother because her survival depended on it. However much it may have been her dream before that moment, Joe sparing Love because she was incubating his child demonstrates to her that her life depends on playing the part in his story just right. But Kate gave Joe his second chance, and she holds the power in their relationship, covering up the news stories of his past to amplify his narrative to the largest audience yet. Well, until our final girl comes into the picture. Louise Bronte Flannery was another young woman chasing a creative dream of becoming a playwright as a student in Beck's class. When she left school to become the caretaker for her dying mother, Louise grew alienated from her writing pursuits and escaped online into the conspiracy of catching Beck's killer. After she loses her mother, Louise longs for purpose and craves excitement, coinciding with Joe's prominent return to New York. And after years of lore building his character, Louise mistakes her obsession for meaning and she sets out to entrap Joe to write the story of justice for Guinevere Beck, which is different from Joe's desire of a love story with Beck, but a little bit similar. When she arrives in his life to expose him, Louise pulls a love and believes that she's taking the lead in defining herself to Joe, even if fictionally at first, but he begins overriding her compass long before she realizes she's become disoriented. Her break-in at the bookstore establishes the character of Bronte, and Louise's later discovered social media deepens the depiction to Joe that she's just an injured soul, someone who doesn't feel like they have a place in the world, which gives Joe an opening to save Louise from the alienation she feels and sweep her off her feet, because if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Joe's romance and undivided attention intoxicate Louise on the idea that she is uniquely worthy of his affection. Louise doesn't try to lure out the real Joe like Love or overlook his past and institutionalize his lies like Kate. She sees his violence firsthand and tries to empathize and assign it deep emotional meaning, because the alternative is confronting the unsettling reality that some men just like hurting people. Louise loses herself into the character of Bronte like Beck loses her agency in Joe's everything ship, because it was easy and comfortable to fall into the portrayal of a perfectly imperfect girl instead of grieving her mother or reflecting on her lack of direction in life and finding her way back to her writing dream. And having a place in Joe's life gave Louise a purpose because it felt like she mattered to him. But it wasn't real. Escaping into a fantasy is unsustainable, and confronting the uncomfortable parts of our lives and ourselves are how we grow as people. Joe never does this. Season after season, he runs from his past and himself. There's no growth, there's no change, there's never any genuine remorse or introspection from him. He's had the same epiphany 3 times and it never sticks. When something doesn't grow, it rots, and by the time Louise looks down at the hollow, rotten, empty husk of a man kneeling before her, she sees where his perpetual escapism leads and resolves to stop running from herself and face it all, no matter what. This final you sets out with the goal to entrap Joe in pursuit of justice, but it's really a pursuit of purpose, starting from the premise that Joe's a serial killer so she can take it upon herself to bring him down. But the more time she spends with Joe, the more cursed she is to see him as human. This contrasts directly with Joe's objectification of Beck. He saw a pretty woman and decided she would be a part of his story. It was always a selfish pursuit and sexual predator shit. In the end, after dehumanizing Beck from the start, Joe has no problem killing her because he never saw the value in her life. Louise starts with her own idea of Joe, but he challenges her preconceived notions about him, and she falls for it because it feels meaningful to believe that she can heal his trauma with her love. You know, since she couldn't heal her mother. But Joe doesn't want her love, he wants validation. He wants to hijack her narrative like he hijacked her abduction. Joe buys Bronte a book deal so that she can write about their love story. Not her dark romance fiction, but the love story that Joe has been crafting, as Louise unknowingly echoes every revision that came before her. Evolving from enemies to lovers like Kate, getting caught up in an affair like Marianne, competing for the lead like Love, being overridden in her identity like Beck, and then confronting Joe to face himself like Candace. Through this process, the final season deconstructs Joe's delusion and his character, ultimately taking away the one thing he clings to for meaning: an audience. When she wakes up to reality, Louise accepts that life isn't as fever-pitched as fiction, although she does have to frickin' fight for that life, and she sacrifices Bronte in the water, executing the tragic end to her love story with Joe so Louise can return. Reoriented by her own moral compass and seeking justice rather than revenge, Louise declares that Joe is going to face a trial and finally see himself. He begs her to kill him, claiming this is how their story ends, but Louise refuses, knowing it's not her place to show Joe who he really is. A jury of his peers will handle that. Louise denying Joe a dramatic death isn't an act of mercy, but really a rejection of the premise that she owes him a climax. She robs Joe of a romantic and consequential ending and refuses to give his life meaning at her own moral expense. It's not a failure of the final season to live up to great expectations. It's like a complete dismantling of Joe's delusional narrative that serves to recenter Louise in her own story and demonstrates her agency through denying Joe and the audience the spectacle that we desire from her. Louise radically accepts herself as dull and unexciting as that might seem, and stops defining her life in relation to Joe. Exposing him, loving him, or killing him, it would all still be about him, and it comes time to live for herself. A recurring theme of You is who gets to control the story, and Louise brings the show to a close by understanding that power and giving it up. She doesn't beat Joe by killing him, but by refusing to become like him. Louise accepts the uncertainty of life and relinquishes narrative control, choosing not to dictate Joe's fate for her own sense of purpose. That's the growth that Joe has been chasing for 5 seasons and can never achieve, and it only took 10 episodes for Louise. Joe's narrative is not only subverted, but silenced by Louise's refusal to listen. There is no trial to witness because fuck Joe. I don't need to hear his resentful mind muttering in court. We know what he did. We saw it happen. I love Louise being the one to bring down Joe because she didn't do it alone, and she doesn't allow the experience to define her. This final You was able to overcome Joe not because she was the singular hero of their story, but thanks to the support, experience, and sacrifice of other women. The compassion of Marianne's speech and resourcefulness of Kate recording Joe's confession set up Louise for success and the most satisfying conclusion to the series. This is the way the show ends. Not with a death, but Joe's silence. And hey, maybe Louise is onto something with this whole decentering Joe thing, considering this show is all I've talked about for a whole year. Maybe it's time for a book. Would you guys watch a video about a book? Because I'm making a video about a book, so stay tuned. And in the meantime, why not check out another video about You? I think you'll find I have quite a few.